Greetings and welcome back. This is fun. So, what we're doing right now is we're in the process of trying to work out the dissipation rate of letting a gradient run down. As to why we're thinking about gradients, there's a bunch of different kinds of biological batteries, is maybe the way you might want to say it. There's many ways of storing energy, and perhaps the one with primacy is concentration gradients. It's very simple in its execution, and yet it's far reaching in its implications. And just to give you one example, the amount of ATP synthesized in our bodies each day is some reasonable fraction, like a half of our body weight. Now, I've had people object to this. They find it's quite a turnoff to say it that way, and so let me give you the provisos. All I'm trying to say is that ADP, what am I? ADPs are turned into ATPs at some rate, and the number of ATPs, if I take the number that are turned over in a day, then and I compute their mass, that mass is going to be on the order of tens of kilograms. So at any rate, the ATP synthases that do that synthesis, there's many reasons that I love them, and one is that I love the third dimension. It's probably has always been one of the highlights of my life. And when I say the third dimension, I mean the fact that human beings now know how to travel around in the third dimension. And so for me, that means above all flight. Normal flight. I go to an airport and I get in an airplane, and I just love that so much. And the thing that I wanted to comment on is that if you look, if you're lucky enough to sit in the front of a plane and have a window seat, you look out the window at the engines, which I always do and very much enjoy. Before the engine started, you'll see that often on the front of the turbine, on many of them, there's a spiral painted. And then when they start the engines, you can still tell that something's painted on there. You go out the taxiway, and then when you turn onto the runway, and if you happen to be listening to the cockpit communications, you'll hear, United 264, clear for takeoff, and the pilot will say 264, clear for takeoff. And then you'll hear the engines start to rev. And if you're looking out the window, what you'll see is that turbine is spinning faster and faster, and at some moment you do not have a clue that there's anything painted on the turbine. And the thing I want to point out is that you're at around 6,000 RPMs at that point. That is, I can divide that by 60 seconds per minute, and that gives me around 100 hertz, 100 revolutions per second. And that's the spin rate of the ATP synthase. That's the reason for this digression. And it's just rather shocking that human beings have figured out how to make an object that does 6,000 RPMs, but it's also even more crazy that evolution has contrived a device that synthesizes ATP. And what runs all of those ATP synthases is what Brian Cox beautifully calls a proton waterfall. At the end of the day, waterfalls are a way to make power. If you think back to old times, and I've even seen this in Ecuador and on some farms, you have a circular pen in which there's an arm to which a donkey is attached, and it goes around in circles, and that's used to do work. You can lift weights with that. And I'm going to make a lot of noise about lifting weights. And so, waterfalls allow you to lift weights. And classically, James Prescott Joule's famed experiment in which he used you could use a weight, lowering of a weight to stir some water. There's all these different contrivances that one can come up with, and so I just think it's pretty amazing that the proton motive force, this sort of gradient, this biological battery, again, that's the point of this long, couple minute now digression, is to say that the biological battery of concentration gradients is like this primitive thing, and yet it is so powerful. And so in the last vignette, what we did is we worked out the delta G associated with taking a particle from one side and putting it to the other, where the concentration on the two sides is different. And today I'm going to be much more precise in the sense that what we're going to do for the moment is we're going to let things run down their concentration gradient. So my little demon, my little Maxwell demon, is going to open the trap door in order to permit a molecule on the higher concentration side to make its way over to the lower concentration side. And what we know is that the delta G that comes out of that is given by this. Since C high is larger than C low, that means that this fraction is greater than 1. That means the log is greater than 0. And that means that the delta G is negative. And that makes sense. We're going to lower the free energy of that world by letting a molecule go from the higher concentration region to the lower concentration region. Last time I did it in the other direction, I was talking about putting a particle up the gradient. And there, what I said is, 2.3 kBTs are required. They're demanded of you for every tenfold excess of concentration that you want to go up. But here what we're going to do is we're going to let this thing bleed off. And what I want to do is I want to compute the net energy change, the free energy change, due to a flux down that gradient. So here's the picture. So over on the right, sorry, I need to duck out of the way. Woo! I duck out of the way. What you can see is that if I want to find the total free energy that results from the molecules running down their gradient, what do? Well, I take the energy per particle, which is this thing, and then I multiply it by the total number of particles taking the ride. That's it. We already did this last time. This is the free energy per particle for going down the proton waterfall or the concentration gradient waterfall. And then this is the total number of particles per second. So note, on this side I have no time units, but now I have time units because J, the flux, is number per area per time. I've compensated that area by multiplying by delta Y, delta Z. That's the cross-sectional area of this little thing. And so this gives me the total free energy dissipated in a given instant. Now, I'm not going to go into the calculation. I give it to you as an exercise, and it's a very fun exercise. And that is the following question. I did this calculation over here on the assumption that one particle went down the gradient waterfall. But in fact, now I'm saying many particles are going to go down this gradient waterfall, and you could say to yourself, hey, you're cheating. And the reason I think you're cheating is that the free energy that you computed is only for taking one, but once you take one, the concentration has changed. That's a good point. That's a great question. And not surprisingly, what you will find is that for typical gradients, like in the Bicoid gradient, what I got when I calculated this is that you're making a 1 over 300, so like a 0.3% change in the concentration. And so it's a very small mistake, and you could fix it by Taylor series if you want. I don't think it's worth it, actually. I think that this formula is perfectly legit. So now what I want to do is I want to compute, I want to find a way to rewrite this in a nice, clean fashion. And what I propose to do in order to accomplish that is, so we've said that dg by dt for a single plane, I'm going to rewrite it differently now, is equal to minus kBt, and then log of c of x plus delta x over c of x times, and I'm going to use parentheses, minus j delta y delta z. I'm claiming that this is equivalent to what I just wrote down, and before I go further, let me examine the two cases. So case one is that c of x plus delta x is greater than c of x. What does that mean? That means that our concentration profile looks like this, right? So in that case, the logarithm, this piece right here, is greater than 0, right? Also, J is negative, because the flux is going to go in this direction. And so that negative across this negative yields a net positive, and so the whole thing is negative. Okay? I have to be careful with my signs here, because I'm trying to work out the free energy, the energy release rate, if you like, associated with going down the gradient. Later on, we're going to be interested in what it costs to actually maintain that gradient, and that'll be a very interesting case in and of itself. Let's look at case number 2. So case number 2, let's see if we still get the right sign of effect. In this case, we have c of x is greater than c of x plus delta x. And so that's this situation right here. And so in this case, note, maybe I'll actually write it down. So in this case, log of c of x plus delta x over cx, this thing is less than 0. Because c of x plus delta x is less than c of x, so I'm taking log of a fraction. I know that's negative. Then I also know from this second term, this thing, I know that j is positive because the flux is in this direction. And so what that means is that this thing is also negative. So this is also less than 0. And so the total expression is negative. So I'm claiming that this expression that I've written down is the expression that will allow us to assess the free energy change. Now, let's take this thing and let's massage it a little bit. So if we were in the classroom, this would be one of those moments where I would talk about the the Michelangelo unfinished statues in Florence. I would do this in the classroom. Why? Because those unfinished statues show us this granite with just these forms emerging out of the rock. Infinite possibility there. And here, this particular equation is kind of staring at us like this. It's saying, I want to be something much more beautiful than what you've written down. And in order to see that, so I want to first note, that log of c of x plus delta x over c of x can be rewritten as log of c of x plus dc by dx evaluated x times delta x all over c of x. That's approximately equal to log of 1 plus 1 over c dc by dx delta x. I'm doing that based on the powers vested in me by the state of Taylor series. So that's good. I've done the Taylor expansion, and now I'm going to do a second Taylor expansion. I'm going to recall that log of 1 plus epsilon is approximately equal to epsilon. Okay? And that's an exercise for you. Earlier in the term, I gave this analysis. I said, if you want to find the Taylor series for something, the way you do it is you write this as like a polynomial, and then you set epsilon equal to 0. That cancels off all terms except a0. You take the derivative, set epsilon equal to 0. You just keep on doing this again and again and again, and each derivative produces for you the next coefficient in the Taylor expansion. So using that, I basically am now ready to write log of c of x plus delta x, c over c of x, is approximately equal to 1 over c dc by dx times delta x. That's my approximate result. So now I have the capacity to write dg by dt for one plane, and that's equal to minus kbt, and then I have 1 over c dc by dx times delta x, and then I have minus, and then minus d dc by dx times delta y delta z. Why? Because this thing, by Fick's law, is j of x. By Fick's law, which we've already invoked many times. So this leaves us with this really, really beautiful expression. I'm very fond of it, which is that the dissipation on one particular plane is given by this really simple expression. All right? So that's a big result. We actually have a formula that tells us how to evaluate the energy release, the reduction in quality of energy, free energy available from the concentration gradient if we allow it to run itself down. When I say run itself down, all I really mean is we allow it to become homogeneous. The system is currently inhomogeneous, as you see up here. The system is inhomogeneous, and by virtue of the fluxes that we're examining, the system will be rendered homogeneous in the long time limit. And what we're trying to figure out is during the time step delta t, how much of that energy will be bled off, how much of the free energy, and this is the answer. So, so here is the result that we just worked out. So I'm just going to point it out to you again. So this is what I just reasoned out. And now if I want to do this over an entire gradient, so you should be thinking like of the Bicoid gradient. So here's, and in the next vignette, we're going to tackle the Bicoid gradient and how much free energy we have to deliver to maintain it. And we will compare it to this expression, which tells us how much free energy can be harvested from it if we were clever enough to come up with a contrivance to do so. And, you know, just to foreshadow that, you know, here's the kind of contrivances that one might appeal to try to milk gradients for work. And so in this case, the point is that if I had a scheme for taking a homogeneous system and constructing a gradient, this is really the essence of the Maxwell-Demon argument. If I constructed my gradient, then this thing would allow me to actually produce work based on that production of the gradient. So, so anyway, my point here is that if I want to find the result for all planes, then I take this expression and I integrate it over all x, as you see here. And if I wanted, I could also go in the perpendicular directions here, you know, and do the aerial aspect as well. For me, I'm happy to just do this one column and to look at the free energy release in that one column. Okay, so all that I did in going from the previous calculation to here is just say, well, I'm going to integrate over the entire length of the thing. So that's basically the setup. So what we'll do in the next vignette is we will ask the question of, in the Bicoid gradient, you know, how much free energy is that's stored in the gradient? And then we'll ask how much free energy has to be deposited in order to manufacture that steady state gradient.